The sleek glass elevator ascended to the 40th floor of Pinnacle Tower, reflecting the morning sunlight across the Manhattan skyline. I adjusted my tailored navy suit and straightened the CEO badge that read, Jennifer Mitchell, Founder-in-Chief. Executive Officer. The quarterly board meeting would begin in 15 minutes, and I wanted to review my presentation one last time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, my assistant Zoe was waiting with my coffee and a stack of reports. Morning, Ms. Mitchell. The board members are arriving. Mr. Westfield from the investment group just called to say he's running 5 minutes late. Thank you, Zoe. I took a sip of the perfectly prepared coffee. Has security finished the quarterly access update? Yes, all set. Oh, and there's a new doorman at the main entrance. Started yesterday. Zoe hesitated, something unusual in her typically efficient demeanor. Is there a problem with him? I asked, scrolling through emails on my phone. No, it's just... I think you might know him. She shifted uncomfortably. It's Robert. Robert Mitchell. My finger froze mid-scroll. Robert, my ex-husband. The man who'd publicly humiliated me at his company party 5 years ago. The man who'd dismissed my dreams and called me just a simple housewife in front of his colleagues while they all laughed. The man who had no idea I now owned the building where he had apparently taken a job as a doorman. I felt a smile spread across my face. Not the warm kind. The kind that acknowledges life's perfect symmetry. Thank you for letting me know, Zoe. Let's proceed with the meeting as planned. I have a feeling it's going to be an excellent day. 5 years earlier, I stood in our spacious kitchen, putting the final touches on a tray of canapes for Robert's corporate party. After 12 years of marriage, I had perfected the role of the supportive wife. I'd quit my marketing job when we married, with grand plans to start my own business. But somehow, Robert's career always took priority, and my dreams were perpetually next year's project. That evening, Robert's firm, Westcott Financial, was celebrating their biggest acquisition yet. As a senior partner, Robert insisted everything be perfect. I'd spent weeks planning, ordering catering, organizing bartenders, and selecting my outfit, a classic black dress that I hoped conveyed successful partner's wife without drawing too much attention. Jennifer, are these the only appetizers? Robert appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in his tailored suit. He frowned at my display. The caterers are bringing the rest, I explained. These are just a few extras I made using that recipe from your boss's wife. He nodded, absently checking his watch. We need to leave in 20 minutes. The host should arrive before the guests. His eyes swept over me. That's what you're wearing? I smoothed down the dress. Yes, I thought it was appropriate. It's fine. He checked his phone, barely looking at me. Oh, and remember, William is bringing potential investors from Tokyo. Try to keep the conversation simple. Stick to topics you understand. That familiar sting of condescension made me wince. Over the years, I'd grown accustomed to these little jabs, comments about my limited business understanding despite my marketing degree, or suggestions that I keep things light with his colleagues. Each remark chipped away at the confident woman I'd once been. The party was held at the Madison, an upscale venue overlooking Central Park. As guests arrived, men in expensive suits, women in designer dresses, I played my part perfectly. I circulated with drinks, engaged in pleasant conversation, and made everyone feel welcome in ways Robert never noticed, but his superiors appreciated. 2 hours into the evening, I was speaking with Sandra, the wife of Robert's colleague, when she mentioned her successful interior design business. You know, I still remember that marketing campaign you developed for Nexus before you left, Sandra said. You had such creative insight. Have you thought about getting back into the field? Before I could answer, Robert appeared with his arm around William, the firm's managing partner, and two Japanese businessmen. He'd clearly overheard Sandra's comment. "Jennifer working again?" Robert laughed, glass of scotch in hand. No. My wife is just a simple housewife. She keeps our home running beautifully, but business isn't really her area." The group chuckled politely, but I felt my face burning. Simple housewife. The words echoed in my head, sharp and dismissive. Not my wife who has a marketing degree. Not my wife who gave up her career to support mine. Just a simple housewife. "Actually," I started, my voice quieter than intended, "I've been developing a business plan for a digital marketing agency focused on female entrepreneurs." Robert's smile tightened. "Jennifer has little hobbies she likes to play with," he said to the group. "Last year it was photography. Before that, cooking classes." He turned to me, his expression clear. "Stop talking." "It's more than a hobby," I persisted, a rare defiance rising in me. "I've been researching the market gap for almost a year." William, perhaps sensing tension, attempted kindness. "That sounds interesting, Jennifer. The business world can always use fresh perspectives." Robert's grip on his glass whitened. "Let's not bore everyone with this, darling. Why don't you check if they need help with the dessert service?" As I walked away, I heard him smoothly transition to discussing their recent acquisition. My ideas, my ambitions, dismissed as easily as requesting more napkins. But something had shifted inside me. The humiliation crystallized years of subtle degradation into one unbearable moment of clarity. Later that night, after we returned home and Robert had fallen asleep, I sat in our home office staring at the business plan I'd carefully developed. For months, I'd been quietly working on this concept, researching market opportunities for a marketing agency that would specifically serve women-owned businesses. I had savings, money inherited from my grandmother that Robert didn't control, and connections from my previous career. All I lacked was courage. A simple housewife, I whispered to myself, the words still sharp. 12 years of my identity gradually eroding, of dreams deferred, of shrinking myself to fit into the narrow space Robert had defined for me. I closed my laptop and made a decision. Tomorrow would be different. The following morning, I waited until Robert left for work. Then I called Sandra, who had given me her business card at the party, with a whispered, "If you ever want to talk about that marketing idea." "Do you have time for coffee today?" I asked when she answered. "Absolutely," she replied without hesitation. "I've been hoping you'd call." We met at a small cafe in Tribeca, far from Robert's office. Sandra listened intently as I outlined my vision for a marketing agency focused on helping women-owned businesses compete in male-dominated sectors. "This is brilliant, Jennifer," she said when I finished. "And timely. The female entrepreneurship space is growing, but it's underserved by traditional agencies." "Robert thinks it's just another hobby," I admitted. Sandra's expression hardened. Slightly. "No offense, but Robert is like many successful men who can't imagine their wives as anything but accessories to their own achievements." She leaned forward. "I have connections, investors who specifically look for women-led startups. Would you be interested in meeting them?" That coffee meeting changed everything. Within a week, I had appointments with 2 potential investors. Within a month, I had secured initial funding, rented a small office space in Brooklyn, and filed incorporation papers for Elevate Marketing Partners. I hadn't told Robert yet. Each day, I left the house as if heading to yoga or lunch with friends, but instead, I was building the foundation of my new business. I hired my first employee, Zoe, a brilliant recent graduate who believed in my vision. We secured our first client, then our second. The work energized me in ways I hadn't felt in years. 3 months into this double life, I knew I needed to tell Robert. I planned a nice dinner at home, prepared his favorite meal, and waited until he seemed relaxed. "I've started a business," I said simply, after pouring him a second glass of wine. Robert looked up, amused. "A business? What kind of business?" "A marketing agency. We already have 3 clients and—" "Jennifer," he interrupted, setting down his fork, "we've talked about this. Your little projects always follow the same pattern. Initial enthusiasm, then reality sets in when you realize how challenging the business world actually is." I pushed my plate away. "This isn't a project, Robert. I've secured funding. I have an office in Brooklyn. I've hired staff." His amusement vanished. "You did what? With whose money?" "My inheritance from Grandma. My money." "And when were you planning to discuss this with me? This affects both of us." "Like you discussed calling me a simple housewife in front of your colleagues?" The words escaped before I could stop them. Robert's face flushed. "That was just conversation. You're being oversensitive." "No, I'm being clear-eyed for the first time in years. I've built something, Robert. Something real. And I didn't tell you because I knew exactly how you would react. Exactly how you're reacting right now." What followed was our worst argument in 12 years of marriage. Robert called my business a waste of money. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Predicted I would fail within 6 months, and insisted I was being irrational and impulsive. I stood my ground, refusing to diminish my achievement or apologize for my ambition. The next morning, Robert left for work without speaking to me. When he returned that evening, his anger had hardened into cold dismissal. "I've been thinking," he said. "Go ahead with this business idea if you need to get it out of your system, but don't expect me to pick up the pieces when it falls apart." "What if it doesn't fall apart?" I challenged. "What if I succeed?" He looked at me with something between pity and contempt. "Jennifer, I work with successful businesses every day. I know what it takes. You've been out of the professional world for over a decade. You're not prepared for how competitive it is." His absolute certainty of my failure was the final straw. "I want a divorce," I said quietly. Robert stared at me, genuinely shocked. He had never imagined I would leave. In his mind, I was the dependent wife, the simple housewife who needed him far more than he needed me. "Don't be dramatic," he finally said. "This business obsession will pass." "It's not the business, Robert. It's that after 12 years, together, you still don't see me. You don't respect me. And I won't live like that anymore." The divorce was ugly. Robert couldn't accept that I was serious, then became furious when he realized I was. He tried to claim part ownership of my business since we were married when I started it. My lawyer, a brilliant woman recommended by Sandra, successfully argued that I had used inheritance money that was never commingled with our joint assets. We sold our Upper East Side apartment, split the proceeds, and went our separate ways. Robert told mutual friends I was having a midlife crisis. Several stopped speaking to me, apparently agreeing with his assessment. I moved to a small apartment in Brooklyn, near my office, and poured everything into building Elevate Marketing. Those first 2 years were the hardest of my life. There were nights I questioned my decision, wondering if Robert had been right about my chances of success. The business world had changed since I'd left it, and the learning curve was steep. Some clients were hesitant to trust a new agency. Cash flow was tight. I took no salary for the first year, living off my portion of our home sale. But gradually, Elevate Marketing established itself. Our focus on women-owned businesses created a loyal client base who referred others. Our campaigns won industry recognition. I expanded from 3 employees to 10, then 20. We moved to larger offices. 3 years after leaving Robert, Elevate had become one of the fastest-growing boutique marketing agencies in New York. We specialized in helping female-founded companies secure funding and market share in technology, finance, and healthcare, traditionally male-dominated industries. Our client list included several businesses that had grown from startups to eight-figure companies. I rarely thought about Robert anymore. Our social circles no longer overlapped. Occasionally, I heard updates through mutual acquaintances. He had been passed over for managing partner at his firm. He had dated a series of younger women, but remained unmarried. These details registered without emotion. He had become a character from another chapter of my life. Then came the opportunity that would unexpectedly bring our stories back into alignment. Elevate had outgrown our Brooklyn space, and I was looking for new offices. Our success had attracted attention from investors who wanted to back my vision for expansion. One investor, Victoria Westfield, suggested we consider space in Pinnacle Tower, a prestigious Manhattan address where her investment group owned significant equity. They're renovating the top floors, Victoria explained over lunch. It would be perfect for Elevate's new headquarters. The location reflects your company's status now. I toured the space the following week, the entire 40th floor with panoramic views of the city. It was a magnificent statement of success, the kind of office I had once imagined for myself before sublimating those dreams to Robert's career. It's perfect, I told Victoria, but the lease costs are significantly higher than what we're paying now. Victoria smiled. What if I told you there's another option? My investment group is looking to divest some real estate holdings. We'd consider selling a minority ownership stake in the building to the right buyer. You're suggesting I buy part of Pinnacle Tower? The idea seemed audacious. Jennifer, Elevate is valued at over $40 million now. You've created something remarkable from nothing. Property ownership is the next logical step, an asset that appreciates while solving your office space needs. The negotiations took months. I brought in financial advisors, real estate experts, and lawyers to ensure the deal made sense. In the end, I purchased a 15% ownership stake in Pinnacle Tower using a combination of company funds and a business loan. Elevate Marketing would occupy the 40th floor, and as part owner, I would have a seat on the building's management board. Life has a strange way of creating perfect symmetry sometimes. A week before our scheduled move to Pinnacle Tower, I was reviewing security personnel changes with the building manager when I noticed a new name on the staff list. Robert Mitchell, recently hired as a doorman. Is this a mistake? I asked, pointing to the name. The manager checked his files. No, he started last week. Previously worked in finance but has been between jobs for a while. Said he needed something steady while he regroups. Seems overqualified, but he's been reliable. So far. I sat back, absorbing this information. Robert, who had once dismissed me as just a simple housewife, was now opening doors for tenants in a building I partially owned. The universe's sense of poetic justice was almost too perfect. I considered having him transferred to another building or assigned to a different shift. Anything to avoid the inevitable encounter. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was the realization that I no longer needed to run from my past. I had rebuilt myself, created something valuable, and succeeded in ways Robert had insisted were impossible for me. Keep him on schedule, I finally said. No changes needed. Which brings me back to that morning in the elevator, learning that my ex-husband was now working as a doorman in my building. After the board meeting, I decided it was time to face the symmetry head-on. I took the elevator down to the lobby alone, and there he was, Robert, in a doorman's uniform, standing at attention near the revolving doors. He had aged in the 5 years since our divorce. His hair was thinner, his face lined with stress. For a moment, I felt an unexpected pang of empathy. Life had clearly taken him in a direction he never anticipated. He didn't notice me at first, busy helping an elderly woman with her packages. When he turned and saw me standing there, recognition dawned slowly, followed by visible shock. His Professional Doorman's posture faltered. "Jennifer?" he managed, his voice barely audible. "Hello, Robert," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I understand you've joined the building staff." He straightened, attempting to recover his composure. "Yes, it's temporary, while I explore some new investment opportunities." I nodded, recognizing the face-saving explanation for what it was. "I see. Well, I should introduce myself properly. I'm Jennifer Mitchell, CEO of Elevate Marketing. We're moving into the 40th floor next week." I paused. "I'm also part owner of this building." The color drained from his face as the full implications hit him. His ex-wife, the simple housewife he had dismissed, was now his employer. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "No reason you would," I replied. Then, seeing his discomfort, I added, "Robert, I have no intention of making things difficult for you. Your position here is secure as long as you perform your duties well." He looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in our entire relationship. What he saw was not the accommodating wife he had known, but a confident business owner who had created her own success. "Thank you," he said finally, "and congratulations on everything you've built." I nodded, then walked past him through the doors he held open. Outside in the bright sunlight, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. I had imagined this moment might bring satisfaction or vindication. Instead, it brought something more valuable: the realization that I no longer needed either. My success wasn't about proving Robert wrong. It was about proving myself right, about my capabilities, my vision, my worth. The woman who had once diminished herself to fit into someone else's narrative had become the author of her own story. As I walked down the street toward my lunch meeting, I smiled thinking about the journey that had brought me here. From simple housewife to CEO and property owner. From seeking approval to giving opportunities. From living in someone else's shadow to casting my own light. That night, I called Sandra, who had become both mentor and friend. "You'll never guess who's working as a doorman at Pinnacle Tower," I said when she answered. After I told her the IE story, she laughed in disbelief. "You can't make this stuff up." "What are you going to do about it?" "Nothing," I replied. "His job performance will determine his future there, just like any other employee." "That's very magnanimous of you," Sandra observed. "I'm not sure I could be so gracious." "It's not about grace," I explained. "It's about perspective. 5 years ago, I defined myself by my relationship to Robert. Now, he's just someone who works in a building I partially own. That change in perspective is worth more than any revenge could ever be." When we moved into our new offices the following week, I watched my team of 35 talented professionals fill the beautiful space we had created together. The floor to ceiling. Windows offered views of the city I had once felt excluded from, but now helped shape. On my desk sat a framed quote that had guided me through the darkest days of rebuilding. "The question isn't who is going to let me, it's who is going to stop me." No one, as it turned out. Not even the man who had once defined my limitations now opening doors for me, literally and figuratively, as I walked into the future I had created for myself. The morning after my encounter with Robert in the lobby of Pinnacle Tower, I woke, with a strange mixture of emotions churning inside me. Seeing him in that doorman's uniform, the shock on his face when he realized who I had become, had stirred memories I thought I'd successfully buried. As I prepared for my day, selecting a crimson power suit that had become something of a lucky charm for important meetings, I found myself reflecting on the painful journey that had led to this unexpected full-circle moment. 5 years ago, Robert's dismissive comment at his company party had been merely the tipping point, the final, public manifestation of a pattern that had been developing throughout our 12-year marriage. The real story of our relationship's deterioration ran much deeper. We met when I was 24, working as a marketing coordinator at Visionary Media, a respected agency known for its innovative campaigns. Robert, 30, and already a rising star at Westcott Financial, had come in for a meeting with our executives. I was assigned to guide him to the conference room, and he'd asked for my card before leaving. His confidence had been magnetic, his interest flattering. When he called to ask me to dinner, I accepted without hesitation. Our courtship was a whirlwind of expensive restaurants, weekend getaways, and cultural events. Robert moved through the world with an assurance I found both attractive and intimidating. He always knew the best restaurants, the right wines, the important people in any room. Next to him, I felt simultaneously elevated and diminished. He introduced me to a lifestyle I hadn't experienced growing up in my middle-class family in Connecticut, and I was intoxicated by it all. "You have so much potential, Jennifer," he told me one night, 6 months into our relationship. "You're smart, beautiful, charming. You could be extraordinary with the right guidance." The right guidance, I would later understand, meant his guidance, his vision of who I should be, not who I actually was. When he proposed after a year of dating, presenting a diamond ring that cost more than my annual salary, I said yes, without reservation. The wedding was lavish, featured in a regional lifestyle magazine, with 250 guests, including several of Robert's influential business associates. My parents, both public school teachers, seemed overwhelmed by the opulence, but happy for what they perceived as my good fortune. "You've found someone who can give you everything," my mother whispered as she helped with my veil, mistaking material security for happiness in a way I would eventually come to understand all too well. The shifts in our dynamics were subtle at first. Robert suggested I leave Visionary Media when my project started requiring occasional late nights. "You don't need that stress," he argued. "We're planning to start a family soon anyway." The agency job did demand long hours, and Robert's income was more than sufficient for both of us. The decision to resign seemed reasonable at the time. I initially imagined a short break from professional life, a year, maybe 2, before either returning to marketing or starting my own consulting business. Robert encouraged me to enjoy my freedom, to take cooking classes, join the right charitable committees, make connections with the wives of his colleagues. Networking, he called it, though it was networking that would benefit his career, not mine. Months slipped into years. The family we had planned never materialized. Medical issues on my side that required several unsuccessful fertility treatments. During those difficult years, my own ambitions receded further into the background as emotional and physical challenges consumed my energy. Robert was supportive in his way, though his disappointment was evident in small comments and gradual, emotional withdrawal. By our 5th anniversary, I had become what most of his circle would describe as a perfect corporate wife. I maintained our home immaculately, hosted dinner parties that advanced his career, served on 3 charitable boards that gave us the right social connections, and always presented myself as poised and supportive at company functions. The woman who had once led creative marketing brainstorms now applied her talents to selecting wine pairings and conversation topics. "You're so lucky," Robert's colleagues' wives would tell me at events. "You don't have to work." They didn't. See how that statement itself devalued everything I did. The invisible labor that maintained our home and social calendar, that supported Robert's advancement, that preserved the illusion of effortless perfection. Robert's ascent at Westcott continued. He was made junior partner in our 7th year of marriage, senior partner by our 10th. With each promotion came a more luxurious apartment, more exotic vacations, more expensive gifts, and more distance between us. We still functioned as a team in public, but privately, we had become management and staff rather than equal partners. The truth I couldn't admit to myself was that Robert had never wanted a partner. He had wanted an asset, a beautiful, intelligent woman who would enhance his image and make his life comfortable without challenging his authority or pursuing ambitions that might compete with his own. Looking back, I can identify the moment I first recognized this truth, though I quickly suppressed it. We were at a dinner with William, Robert's managing partner, and his wife Diane, who had recently published a successful cookbook. When Diane enthusiastically discussed her upcoming book tour, Robert commented, "It must be nice for William that your little hobby is paying off." The flash of hurt on Diane's face was quickly masked, but I saw it clearly and recognized it deeply. William, to his credit, responded, "It's hardly a hobby. Diane's book is outselling most of the business titles on Amazon right now." Robert had laughed and changed the subject, but the moment stayed with me. That night, I lay awake beside my sleeping husband, wondering when exactly I had become invisible. Not just to Robert, but to myself. The following morning, I opened the laptop I rarely used and typed, "Returning to marketing career after 10-year gap," into the search bar. I quickly closed it when I heard Robert approaching, feeling inexplicably guilty, as though I'd been caught doing something shameful rather than simply contemplating my own professional future. It was around our 11th anniversary that I began secretly developing my business plan for what would eventually become Elevate Marketing. The idea had germinated during a Women's Foundation luncheon where I'd been seated next to a brilliant entrepreneur who had created a line of adaptive clothing for people with disabilities. When she mentioned struggling to find marketing support that understood her vision, something clicked in my mind. Most agencies are still dominated by men who don't understand the needs of businesses focused on traditionally female concerns, she explained. They don't take us seriously, don't understand our customers, and charge rates designed for multinational corporations. I recognized an untapped market opportunity, a specialized marketing agency focused on women-led businesses that were breaking ground in underserved areas. These entrepreneurs needed support from professionals who understood both marketing principles and the unique challenges faced by women in business. For months, I researched in secret, using time when Robert was at work to develop my business concept. I connected with former colleagues from Visionary, asking careful questions about how the industry had evolved. I took online courses to update my skills, paying for them from the personal spending account Robert had set up for me, the only money I controlled directly. I built a business plan, financial projections, and even mock campaigns for potential clients. This secret project became a lifeline, reconnecting me to capabilities and passions I had long suppressed. When I worked on it, I wasn't Robert's wife, but Jennifer Mitchell, marketing strategist and entrepreneur. The person I had once been began to reawaken, stretching after a long hibernation. The night of Robert's company party, the night he publicly dismissed me as just a simple housewife, I had actually been excited to attend. Earlier that day, I'd completed the financial section of my business plan and felt a quiet confidence I hadn't experienced in years. The black dress I chose wasn't just appropriate for a corporate wife, it made me feel like a businesswoman again. I never intended to discuss my business idea at the party, but when Sandra, one of the few corporate wives with her own career, mentioned remembering my work at Visionary, something prompted me to share. Perhaps it was the momentary connection with someone who saw me as more than an appendage to my husband. Perhaps it was the glass of champagne. Perhaps it was simply that after years of diminishment, I needed to speak my ambitions aloud to make them real. Whatever the reason, Robert's cutting response, his casual dismissal in front of people whose respect I still craved, crystallized everything wrong with our marriage. The pain wasn't just about that single moment of humiliation, but the recognition of how completely I had allowed myself to disappear. The days following that party marked the beginning of the end for us, though Robert didn't realize it immediately. When I mentioned the digital marketing agency idea again at home, he responded with practiced patience, as though humoring a child. "Jenny," he said, using the diminutive I'd always disliked, "marketing has completely transformed since you left the field. Everything is digital, data-driven, highly specialized. The learning curve would be enormous." "I know," I replied. I've Been studying the changes, taking online courses. Online courses, he repeated with a small laugh. That's not the same as actual experience. Do you have any idea how many marketing agencies fail each year? How competitive the industry is? He shook his head. If you're bored, why not expand your volunteer work? The Children's Hospital Board would love to have you. His comments weren't cruel. That would have been easier to combat. They were reasonably stated, seemingly concerned for my welfare. And yet underlying them was a fundamental disbelief in my capabilities, a certainty that I couldn't succeed outside the boundaries he had established for me. When I met with Sandra for coffee the following week, I expected similar discouragement disguised as practical advice. Instead, she listened intently to my business concept, asking penetrating questions that helped me refine my thinking. There's definitely a market here, she said finally, and your background gives you credibility despite the gap years. But Jennifer, the bigger question is whether you're prepared for how Robert will react. Men like him don't generally support their wives building independent identities. He already thinks it's a passing whim, I admitted. Sandra's expression was knowing. And that's safer for him. The moment you demonstrate serious intent, when this becomes real rather than theoretical, you'll see a different response. She hesitated. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't. Not really. But moving forward with Elevate Marketing forced me to confront not just Robert's opposition, but my own complicity in the dynamics of our marriage. Each step toward building my business became a step toward reclaiming my identity, recovering pieces of myself I had gradually surrendered over 12 years. The day I signed the lease for my small Brooklyn office space, using funds from my grandmother's inheritance that Robert had never touched, I felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. The modest space with its mismatched furniture and single window overlooking a brick wall represented something precious, a room of my own, both literally and figuratively. When Robert discovered bank statements showing substantial withdrawals from my inheritance account, his reaction confirmed everything Sandra had warned me about. His concern about the financial irresponsibility of my business venture quickly evolved into something darker when he realized I was serious. This isn't just about the money, is it? He demanded during one particularly difficult confrontation. It's about you doing something without my approval. My approval. Those two words illuminated the true state of our marriage more clearly than anything else could have. Not my support, not my agreement, but my approval, as though he were the authority and I the subordinate requiring permission. Yes, I answered honestly. It is about that, about the fact that I shouldn't need your approval to pursue my own goals. The weeks that followed were a cold war in our apartment. Robert fluctuated between dismissive predictions of my business's failure, angry accusations of betrayal, and occasional attempts at reconciliation predicated on my coming to my senses. When those tactics failed to deter me, he tried a different approach. I've been thinking, he said one evening, his tone carefully modulated. If you're determined to do this, perhaps we should discuss how to integrate your business with my connections. I could introduce you to some potential clients, help you establish credibility. The offer seemed generous on its surface, Robert finally supporting my ambitions. But I recognized the underlying strategy. By making my success dependent on his influence, he would maintain control, ensuring my business became an extension of his identity rather than a manifestation of mine. Thank you, I said carefully, but I need to build this independently. I've already lined up my first 2 clients. His expression hardened. Suit yourself, but don't expect me to bail you out when reality hits. That exchange marked the point of no return for us. Robert couldn't accept my independence, and I could no longer accept his need for dominance. When I finally asked for a divorce, his shock seemed genuine. He truly hadn't believed I would choose my own path over our marriage. In his mind, the comfortable lifestyle he provided should have outweighed any desire for autonomy or achievement. The divorce process revealed financial complexities I hadn't fully understood during our marriage. While Robert had always been the primary earner, his spending habits meant our savings were less substantial than I'd assumed. He fought bitterly to claim a portion of my business, arguing that as my husband, he had indirectly supported its creation. Conveniently, forgetting his active discouragement. My lawyer, Abigail Winters, was magnificent. A specialist in high-asset divorces who had seen countless cases of financial control disguised as financial management. She helped me understand how Robert had systematically limited my financial independence throughout our marriage, making me dependent on his goodwill for everything from household expenses to personal purchases. "It's a common pattern," Abigail explained during one particularly difficult meeting. Sharing an account for household expenses while maintaining separate personal accounts might seem equitable, but not when one person's personal account contains 95% of the family wealth. With Abigail's guidance, I secured a fair settlement that included half the proceeds from our apartment sale and complete ownership of Elevate Marketing. Robert's attempts to claim my inheritance-funded business failed, but the process drained much of my startup capital, forcing me to operate on a shoestring budget during those crucial early months. Moving from our luxurious Upper East Side apartment to a one-bedroom in Brooklyn was both a financial necessity and a symbolic break. My new place was one-third the size, in a neighborhood Robert would have considered beneath us, with none of the Doorman services or amenities I had grown accustomed to. Yet arranging that small space according to my own preferences, filling it with colors and textures Robert would have vetoed, creating a home office that prioritized function over impression, felt like an act of liberation. Those first months of independence were a brutal education in the realities Robert had protected me from. Managing household finances, navigating health insurance options, handling maintenance issues, making every decision without consultation, I felt alternately empowered and overwhelmed. There were nights I sobbed from the stress, questioning whether I had made a catastrophic mistake. The business grew more slowly than projected. Bills piled up. Former friends, Robert's friends really, stopped calling. Zoe Coleman, my first employee, became my rock during this difficult period. Fresh from graduate school with a master's in digital marketing, she brought contemporary skills and boundless enthusiasm to complement my strategic experience. When cash flow became critical and I couldn't pay myself, she accepted partial payment and equity in the company, a decision that would eventually make her wealthy as Elevate grew. "We're building something important here," she insisted during our darkest financial moment, when I considered closing the business to seek employment with a stable salary. "Women need what we're offering. We just need to survive this valley." She was right. 6 months after launching, we landed our breakthrough client, a female-founded financial technology company developing tools specifically for women investors. Their founder, Rebecca Torres, had been rejected by 3 traditional agencies who failed to understand her vision or market. Our campaign for their launch exceeded all performance metrics, putting Elevate on the map in both the financial and marketing worlds. That success led to referrals, press coverage in industry publications, and inquiries from potential clients who resonated with our mission. We expanded cautiously, adding specialists in social media, content development, and data analytics. Our office, initially feeling cavernous with just Zoe and me, soon required additional space for a growing team. As the business stabilized, I also began rebuilding my personal life. The friends who remained after the divorce were genuine connections rather than social obligations. I tried dating again, awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence, as I rediscovered myself as an individual rather than someone's wife. Some men were intrigued by my success, others were intimidated by it. I learned to recognize the distinction quickly. Through it all, I occasionally heard updates about Robert through mutual acquaintances. His career trajectory had stalled somewhat after our divorce. Rumors suggested he had made some poor investment decisions, perhaps overextending himself to maintain the lifestyle he was accustomed to without my contribution to household expenses. He dated a series of younger women, none of the relationships lasting more than a few months. I felt no satisfaction in these reports. The woman who had once desperately needed to prove herself to Robert was gradually being replaced by someone who genuinely wished him well from a distance. My happiness no longer depended on his failure. My success no longer required his recognition. This emotional independence was perhaps the most significant transformation of all. 3 years after the divorce, Elevate Marketing had grown beyond my initial vision. We employed 27 people, occupied a renovated warehouse space in Uzzar, Dumbo, and had a client waiting list for the first time. Our reputation for helping women-led businesses secure funding and market share had made us the go-to agency in several specialized sectors. We had just completed a particularly successful campaign for a women's health startup when I received an unexpected email from William, Robert's former managing partner at Westcott Financial. He congratulated me on Elevate's success, mentioning that he'd seen our work featured in an industry publication, then asked if I would consider meeting to discuss a potential collaboration. My first instinct was caution. William had always been kind to me, but he represented a connection to Robert and the life I had left behind. After consideration, I agreed to coffee, curious about what he might propose. William had aged since I'd last seen him, his hair now completely silver, though his sharp intelligence remained evident. After brief pleasantries, he explained his situation. "I left Westcott last year," he said. "The culture there was changing in ways I couldn't support. I've started a boutique investment firm focusing on businesses with social impact components." He paused. "Many of these companies are led by women, and they need marketing that understands their unique value propositions." His proposal was straightforward. Elevate would become the preferred marketing partner for his portfolio companies, with the possibility of equity arrangements in selected ventures. It was an extraordinary opportunity that would connect us to well-funded startups aligned with our mission. "Why Elevate?" I asked directly. "There are larger agencies with more resources." William's response was equally direct. "Because you understand these businesses in ways those agencies don't. And frankly, Jennifer, I've watched what you've built from nothing with immense admiration. You've created something authentic in an industry full of smoke and mirrors." Before agreeing, I needed to address the elephant in the room. "William, I appreciate your interest, but I have to ask, is Robert involved in your new venture in any way?" William shook his head. "Robert is no longer in my professional or personal circle. Some bridges can't be rebuilt." He hesitated. "I should probably tell you that his situation at Westcott has become precarious. The partners were not impressed with how he handled certain aspects of your divorce, and his judgment on some investment decisions has been questioned. But that's not relevant to our potential collaboration." I appreciated his transparency. After consulting with my leadership team, I agreed to William's proposal, beginning a partnership that would significantly expand Elevate's impact and profitability. The collaboration with William's investment firm accelerated Elevate's growth trajectory. Our team expanded to 35, then 40. We opened a small satellite office in San Francisco to serve West Coast clients. Industry awards and recognition accumulated. I was invited to speak at conferences, profiled in business publications, asked to mentor emerging female entrepreneurs. The irony wasn't lost on me. The business Robert had dismissed as a hobby now generated annual revenue exceeding 8 figures. The simple housewife now led a company valued at over $40 million. I had proven him wrong in every possible way. Yet that victory felt hollow compared to the deeper satisfaction of creating something meaningful, of helping other women achieve their ambitions. of rediscovering my own capabilities. 4 years. After launching Elevate, I began considering our next evolution. Our Brooklyn headquarters, once spaciously adequate, now felt cramped with a team that had doubled in size. Our client base had expanded to include larger companies requiring more comprehensive services. We needed a space that reflected our current status and future aspirations. Victoria Westfield's suggestion that we consider Pinnacle Tower came at this perfect inflection point. When she additionally proposed partial ownership of the building, the opportunity aligned with my developing vision of Elevate as more than a marketing agency, as a platform for female economic empowerment. The negotiations were complex, requiring financial acumen I had developed through both necessity and education since my divorce. The Jennifer who had once deferred to Robert on all financial matters now confidently evaluated capitalization rates, debt service coverage ratios, and internal rates of return. The substantial business loan I secured based on Elevate's performance and projections represented a level of financial trust that would have seemed impossible 5 years earlier. When the final agreements were signed, transferring 15% ownership of Pinnacle Tower to Elevate Holdings, the parent company I had created, I experienced a moment of profound realization. This wasn't just a business transaction, it was the completion of a journey from dependence to self-determination, from invisibility to undeniable presence. The universe's perfect symmetry in placing Robert as a doorman in my building wasn't something I could have orchestrated or even imagined. When I saw his name on the security personnel list, my first reaction was discomfort rather than satisfaction. I briefly considered having him transferred, not out of lingering animosity, but to avoid potential awkwardness for both of us. My decision to leave him in position came from a place of neutrality rather than vindictiveness. Robert's presence or absence no longer held emotional power over me. If our paths crossed in the lobby, we would both be adults navigating an unexpected situation. If the arrangement became uncomfortable for him, he would make his own choice about continuing in the position. The morning after our first encounter in the lobby, I arrived at Pinnacle Tower earlier than usual to oversee preparations for our office move. As I approached the entrance, I saw Robert at his post, opening doors for early arrivals. He noticed me immediately, his posture stiffening slightly. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," he said formally as I approached, maintaining professional distance despite our shared history. "Good morning, Robert," I replied with equal professionalism. As he held the door for me, I was struck by a wave of unexpected emotion, not satisfaction at his reduced circumstances or vindication at my success, but a peculiar sadness for all that had been lost between us. The bright, ambitious young man I had married was now a middle-aged doorman greeting his ex-wife as Ms. Mitchell. The promising couple we had once been had devolved into this awkward tableau of reversed fortunes. In that moment, I realized that Robert's dismissal of me as a simple housewife had revealed more about his limitations than mine. He had been unable to see value beyond conventional measures of success, unable to recognize that the woman beside him contained multitudes beyond her role in his life. Now, 5 years later, I wondered if his current circumstances had taught him what I had learned through building Elevate, that true worth isn't determined by job titles or social status, that resilience matters more than achievement, that authenticity eventually outweighs appearance. As I walked through the door he held, I silently wished him the capacity for this understanding, not because he deserved my goodwill, but because I deserved to release the last vestiges of bitterness. My journey from corporate wife to CEO had given me success beyond anything Robert had imagined for me. More importantly, it had given me myself, whole, independent, and finally, completely free. As autumn descended on New York City, Elevate Marketing's transition to our new headquarters at Pinnacle Tower was finally complete. The 40th floor had been transformed according to my exact specifications, open collaborative spaces balanced with quiet focus areas, a state-of-the-art conference room with panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline, and an employee lounge designed for both relaxation and creative brainstorming. Every detail reflected our company culture: innovative, supportive, and unapologetically bold. Standing in my new office, watching the early morning light cast golden reflections across the polished surfaces, I felt a moment of pure contentment. The sleek desk made of sustainable bamboo, the carefully curated art by female artists, the subtle integration of our signature teal accents, this space perfectly embodied everything Elevate had become. My morning ritual included arriving before the rest of the team to enjoy 30 minutes of solitude for planning and reflection. But today, my peaceful moment was interrupted by a knock at my door. Zoe, now our Chief Operating Officer, entered, with 2 coffee cups and a concerned expression. "Morning," she said, handing me my usual oat milk latte. "Sorry to intrude on your quiet time, but there's something you should know before the team arrives." "What's happened?" I asked, immediately alert to her tone. "It's about Robert." She hesitated. "Apparently, there was an incident in the lobby yesterday evening, after you'd left for the day." I set down my coffee. "What kind of incident?" "He got into an argument with one of our clients, Madison Ross from Artemis Tech. From what security reported, she complained about his attitude. He responded inappropriately, and the situation escalated. The building manager has temporarily reassigned him pending an investigation." Madison Ross was one of our most important clients, the CEO of a women-led cybersecurity firm that had broken barriers in a notoriously male-dominated industry. She was brilliant, demanding, and a fierce advocate for women in technology, everything Elevate represented. Define responded. "Inappropriately," I said, already feeling a familiar tension creeping into my shoulders. Zoe grimaced. According to witnesses, when Madison complained about him not calling her a car quickly enough, he muttered something about entitled women who think they're special because they play with computers. I closed my eyes briefly. Robert's comment revealed so much: his lingering resentment toward successful women, his inability to adapt to changing power dynamics, his self-destructive pride. Even in his reduced circumstances, he couldn't stop himself from expressing the attitudes that had contributed to his downfall. "Madison wants to file a formal complaint with building management," Zoe continued. "She doesn't know your connection to Robert, and I thought you should be aware before she calls you about it." "Thank you," I said quietly. "I'll speak with her directly." After Zoe left, I stood at my window, watching the city awaken far below. The situation presented a complex ethical dilemma. As part owner of the building, I had influence over personnel decisions. As Robert's ex-wife, I had personal history that complicated my objectivity. As Madison's marketing partner, I had responsibilities to support her legitimate complaint. Before I could sort through these competing considerations, my phone rang. Madison's name flashed on the screen. "Jennifer," she began without preamble. When I answered, "I need to discuss an unacceptable interaction I had with one of your building's employees yesterday." I listened as she detailed the encounter, how she had requested a taxi after a late meeting, how Robert had seemed deliberately slow to respond, how his muttered comment had been clearly audible, and how his subsequent defensiveness had escalated rather than diffused the situation. "I understand your frustration completely," I said when she finished. "That behavior is absolutely unacceptable. Before we discuss how to address it, there's something I should disclose." I took a deep breath. "The doorman involved is my ex-husband." The silence that followed was profound. "Your ex-husband," Madison finally repeated. "The man who works as a doorman in the building you partially own is your ex-husband." "Yes, it's a recent and unexpected development. He was hired through normal channels before I acquired my ownership stake. I learned of his employment only when we were preparing to move Elevate into the building." "Well," Madison said after Another pause. That adds a layer of complexity I wasn't expecting. It doesn't change the validity of your complaint, I assured her. Robert's behavior was unprofessional and inappropriate, regardless of our past connection. I'll ensure it's addressed properly through building management. After finishing the call with Madison, I contacted Howard Phillips, the building manager, requesting a meeting to discuss the incident. His response was immediate. He would come to my office within the hour. Howard was a consummate professional in his mid-50s who had managed premium Manhattan properties for decades. When I explained my relationship to Robert and the ethical considerations it created, he nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate your transparency, Ms. Mitchell. To be frank, Mr. Mitchell's performance has been problematic beyond this incident. He's frequently late, often displays attitude issues with female tenants specifically, and seems to consider certain aspects of the job beneath him. I see, I said, unsurprised yet still disappointed. What would your recommendation be if I weren't involved? Given his performance history and the seriousness of this incident, termination would be on the table. At minimum, a formal reprimand. And final warning. Howard paused. However, your connection complicates matters. Any decision could be perceived as either too harsh or too lenient because of your history. He was right. If Robert were fired, he might claim it was personal vendetta. If he received special leniency, it would undermine building standards and potentially my own professional reputation. I'd like to recuse myself from this specific personnel decision, I said finally. Please handle it according to standard protocols as if I had no connection to the employee in question. I trust your judgment. Howard seemed relieved. I appreciate that, Ms. Mitchell. I'll keep you informed of the outcome. After he left, I tried to focus on preparation for an upcoming client presentation, but my thoughts kept returning to Robert. Despite everything, I felt an unwelcome twinge of concern for his situation. Not because I still harbored feelings for him, but because witnessing anyone's downfall, even someone who had hurt you, is a complicated emotional experience. The Robert I had married had been proud, ambitious, and confident to the point of arrogance. He had defined himself by his professional success and social status. To see him struggling as a doorman, unable to adapt to his changed circumstances or control his resentment, felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. Around noon, Howard called to inform me that after reviewing the incident and Robert's employment record, they had decided to terminate his position. Standard procedure, he assured me. The decision would have been the same regardless of my connection. He's been notified and has already left the building, Howard concluded. We'll arrange for his final paycheck and paperwork according to protocol. I thanked him for the update, then sat in silence after ending the call. Robert had now lost his job because of his inability to treat a successful woman with basic, professional respect, a bitter echo of how he had treated me during our marriage. The symmetry was almost too perfect, too pointed in its karmic precision. Later that afternoon, as I left a meeting with our creative team, my assistant handed me a note that had been delivered to reception. Need to talk. Central Park Cherry. Hill Fountain, 7 p.m. R. The handwriting was unmistakably Robert's, precise and slightly slanted, just as I remembered from birthday cards and anniversary notes in another lifetime. My first instinct was to ignore the request. We had nothing more to say to each other, and meeting outside of professional contexts seemed unnecessary and potentially uncomfortable. And yet, curiosity and a strange sense of unfinished business pulled at me. Perhaps this final conversation was needed, a coda to the complicated symphony of our relationship. I texted Zoe to reschedule our evening strategy session, then replied to the note with a simple confirmation. I'll be there. Central Park in early October offered a perfect transition between seasons. Summer's lush greens beginning to give way to autumn's golden palette. The late evening sunlight filtered through partially yellowed leaves as I approached Cherry Hill Fountain, a location Robert and I had often visited during our early courtship. He was already there, sitting on a bench with his gaze fixed on the fountain's flowing water. Without his doorman's uniform, dressed instead in jeans and a gray sweater, he looked more like the man I had married. Though older now, lines of stress etched more deeply around his eyes and mouth. He stood when he saw me approaching. "Jennifer, thank you for coming." "Hello, Robert," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "You wanted to talk." He gestured to the bench and we both sat, maintaining a careful distance between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the fountain's gentle splashing filling the silence. "I lost my job today," he finally said, his voice carefully controlled. "I know. I was informed of the decision." "But you didn't make it?" There was a hint of challenge in his question. "No, I recused myself from the process precisely to avoid any suggestion of personal bias." He nodded slowly. "That sounds like you, always concerned with proper procedures." A pause. The Jennifer I knew would have fought to save my job, regardless of what I'd done. The Jennifer you knew doesn't exist anymore, Robert. She disappeared somewhere during our marriage when you stopped seeing her as a person with her own ambitions and started seeing her as an extension of yourself. My directness seemed to surprise him. The Robert I had been married to would have immediately become defensive, perhaps even angry. This Robert, however, simply looked tired. "I've had a lot of time to think these past few years," he said finally, "about us, about what happened, about who I was then." He stared at his hands. "I wasn't a good husband to you." The admission, so simple and yet so profound, caught me off guard. In all the scenarios I had imagined for this conversation, Robert's self-awareness had never been among them. "No," I agreed quietly. "You weren't. When you started your business, when you asked for a divorce, I told myself you were being irrational, ungrateful, that you'd fail without me." A bitter laugh escaped him. "I couldn't have been more wrong. Look at you now. CEO, property owner, success story. And look at me. This isn't about winning or losing, Robert. Isn't it?" His gaze met mine directly. "You won. I lost. The simple housewife built an empire while the successful finance guy ended up opening doors for people who used to be his peers. It's like some kind of morality tale." I shook my head, frustrated by his persistent framing of our story as a competition. "That's still not seeing me clearly. My success isn't about defeating you. It's about becoming the person I was always capable of being, the person you couldn't or wouldn't see." We sat in silence again, the park growing darker around us as twilight deepened. Families with children gradually disappeared, replaced by couples strolling hand in hand and the occasional jogger. "Why did you want to see me, Robert?" I finally asked. "If it's about getting your job back, that's not something I can or would intervene in. It's not about the job." He hesitated. "I wanted to apologize for all of it, for dismissing your dreams, for treating you like an accessory rather than a partner, for not recognizing your potential." Another pause. "For calling you a simple housewife at that party." The apology I had once longed for, delivered years too late. Yet there was something genuine in his voice that touched a place in me I thought had long since healed over. "Thank you for saying that," I said carefully. "I appreciate your apology." "Do you forgive me?" he asked, an unexpected vulnerability in his question. I considered his query seriously, respecting its importance enough not to offer a reflexive response. "I released my anger toward you a long time ago," I said finally. "It was necessary for my own healing, for building my new life. Forgiveness isn't about pretending the hurt never happened. It's about not allowing that hurt to control your future. So yes, I forgive you, but that doesn't mean forgetting or minimizing what occurred between us. Robert nodded slowly, absorbing my words. I've made a mess of things, Jennifer. Not just with you, but everything. The firm pushed me out last year, said my investment strategies had become too risky, but we both know it was more than that. I lost most of my savings on a bad real estate venture. Couldn't keep the apartment. Couldn't maintain the lifestyle. He gestured vaguely. Now I'm staying with my brother in Queens, working doorman jobs because it's one of the few positions that doesn't require recent references or experience. His vulnerability was so unexpected, so contrary to the proud man I had known, that I felt a complex wave of emotions. Pity, certainly, but also an uncomfortable recognition of how completely fortune's wheel had turned for both of us. I'm sorry things have been difficult, I said sincerely. Despite our past, I never wished hardship on you. I know. A sad smile briefly crossed his face. You were always better than me that way. I'll be honest, when I first saw you in that lobby, when I realized you were my boss in a way, I was bitter. Felt like the final humiliation. But these past weeks, watching you, you've built something real, something meaningful. All those qualities I dismissed as softness or naivety. Your empathy, your collaborative approach, your attention to people's needs, they're the foundation of your success. His insight surprised me again. The Robert I remembered had never been particularly self-reflective or willing to recognize his own blind spots. Hardship can be clarifying, I acknowledged. For both of us, it seems. We fell silent again, the park now fully embraced by evening darkness, the fountain illuminated by subtle lighting that made the water droplets sparkle like diamonds. What will you do now? I asked eventually. He shrugged. Start over, I guess. At 45, with no job, minimal savings, and a career trajectory that's headed in the wrong direction. He looked at me directly. Any advice? You seem to have mastered the art of reinvention. The question felt genuine rather than sardonic, and I considered it seriously. Stop defining success by external markers. Title, income, address, I said after a moment. Figure out what you're genuinely good at. What brings you satisfaction beyond status? Be willing to start small and build with integrity. And most importantly, examine how you relate to others, especially women in professional contexts. Your attitude cost you this job, and I suspect it's damaged other opportunities as well. He winced but nodded. Fair assessment. I've got a lot to work on. As we prepared to part ways, Robert hesitated, then asked, Is there any chance we could be friends someday? Not now, obviously, but eventually? The question was so unexpected that I didn't immediately know how to respond. Friendship with Robert had never been part of my imagined future. I don't know, I answered honestly. Too much has happened between us for a simple reset. But I wish you well, Robert. Genuinely. He accepted this with a nod, seeming to understand that it was the most I could offer. As we stood to leave, he extended his hand formally. Thank you for meeting me. And congratulations on everything you've built. You deserve it all. I shook his hand briefly, this small physical contact after years of separation feeling strangely significant. Not a rekindling of old feelings, but a civilized conclusion to a chapter that had contained both love and pain. Goodbye, Robert. I hope you find your way. Walking away from the fountain, from Robert, from the physical embodiment of my past, I felt lighter somehow. Not because of schadenfreude at his reduced circumstances, but because our interaction had finally freed me from the last lingering question. What would I feel when I confronted him as an equal rather than as the wounded party? The answer, I now knew, was compassion without attachment, understanding without obligation. The next morning, I arrived at Pinnacle Tower with a renewed sense of purpose. As I passed through the lobby, now staffed by a different doorman who greeted me with professional courtesy, I realized that Robert's presence or absence no longer carried emotional weight. He had become simply part of my story, rather than a defining element of it. In my office, preparing for the day ahead, I received an unexpected call from Victoria Westfield, my investment partner in Pinnacle Tower. "Jennifer, do you have a few minutes to discuss a potential expansion opportunity?" she asked after our initial greetings. "Of course," I replied, intrigued. "My investment group has been approached about a commercial property development in Chicago. Mixed use, premium, location, strong growth projections. Given Elevate's success in New York, we wondered if you might be interested in establishing a Midwest presence with an ownership stake similar to our Pinnacle arrangement." The prospect was both exciting and daunting. Expanding Elevate to a second major market would require significant resources, both financial and human. It would mean extended time away from New York during the initial setup, new hiring, new challenges. 5 years ago, when I was just launching Elevate, such an opportunity would have seemed impossible, beyond my capabilities and resources. Even 2 years ago, I might have hesitated, worried about overstretching. Now, however, I felt ready to consider it seriously. "Send over the prospectus," I said. "I'd like to review the details before we discuss further." After ending the call, I gazed out at the Manhattan skyline, the city that had witnessed both my lowest moments and my greatest triumphs. From corporate wife to entrepreneur, from financial dependence to property ownership, from defined by marriage to defined by achievement, my journey had transformed me in ways I could never have anticipated when Robert first dismissed me as just a simple housewife. That afternoon, I called a leadership meeting to discuss potential expansion to Chicago. As my executive team gathered in our state-of-the-art conference room, Zoe, now COO, Marcus heading creative, Ling leading digital strategy, and Amara directing client services, I felt a surge of pride in what we had built together. This wasn't just my success. It belonged to everyone who had believed in Elevate's mission when it was nothing more than an idea born from adversity. "Before we dive into this opportunity," I began, looking around at these talented individuals who had trusted their careers to my vision, "I want to acknowledge how far we've come. 5 years ago, Elevate was just me and Zoe in a tiny Brooklyn office with mismatched furniture and enormous ambition. And a broken coffee maker," Zoe added with a grin, prompting laughter around the table. "And a broken coffee maker," I agreed. "Now we're discussing multi-city expansion and property investment. But what matters most isn't the growth metrics or the revenue figures. It's that we've stayed true to our founding mission, supporting women-led businesses, elevating underrepresented voices, and proving that compassionate, ethical marketing can also be highly profitable." As the discussion progressed, ideas flowing freely in the culture of open collaboration we had deliberately fostered, I found myself reflecting on the complete reversal from my married life with Robert. There, I had been the silent partner, the supportive background figure whose opinions were tolerated rather than valued. Here, I was the visionary, the decision-maker, the leader whose judgment was respected and whose vulnerability was seen as strength rather than weakness. The meeting concluded with a clear action plan. We would conduct thorough due diligence on the Chicago opportunity. Zoe would lead a site visit team the following week, and we would reconvene with preliminary findings before making any commitments. That evening, working late after most of the team had departed, I received a text from Sandra, the woman whose encouragement had been so crucial in Elevate's earliest days. Now a close friend and occasional business advisor, she had become someone I trusted implicitly. "Dinner tonight? Have news to share." We met at a small Italian restaurant in the West Village, one of our favorite spots for conversations that blended personal and professional topics. Sandra looked radiant, her confidence having only grown in the years since we first connected. After ordering, she leaned forward with a conspiratorial smile. "So, my news. I've been asked to join the board of Westcott Financial." I nearly choked on my water. "Westcott? Robert's old firm?" She nodded, clearly enjoying my surprise. "The very same. They're attempting to modernize their image, bring in more diverse leadership. Apparently, my success in sustainable investment makes me the perfect candidate." Her smile turned slightly wicked. "I may have mentioned knowing you during the interviews. Their reaction was interesting." "I can imagine," I replied, amused despite myself at the thought of Sandra mentioning my name in Westcott's boardroom, a place that had once seemed the exclusive domain of men like Robert. "I haven't accepted yet," Sandra continued. "Wanted to check with you first. Given the history, I'd understand if you'd prefer I decline." Her consideration touched me deeply. "Sandra, you should absolutely accept. Your presence on their board would be transformative, not just symbolically, but practically. And honestly, Westcott is just a company now, not a painful memory. That chapter is closed." As we enjoyed our meal, sharing updates on projects and mutual acquaintances, I realized how completely true that statement was. Westcott, like Robert, had lost its power to evoke emotional reaction. The places and people that had once loomed so large in my experience had been reduced to appropriate scale, just elements in a life story rich with many other characters and settings. Over dessert, Sandra asked about the Chicago opportunity, having heard about it through investment circles. As I outlined the potential expansion, her expression grew thoughtful. "You know, when you first told me about your business idea in that coffee shop 5 years ago, I believed in your vision, but even I couldn't have predicted this level of success this quickly." She raised her wine glass in a small toast. "To the simple housewife who built an empire." The phrase that had once wounded so deeply had been reclaimed, transformed from insult to ironic badge of honor. I touched my glass to hers. "To all the simple housewives finding their power," I amended. Walking home later through the vibrant city streets, I reflected on the strange, winding path that had led me here. The painful ending of my marriage had been the beginning of my true self-discovery. Robert's dismissive comment at that corporate party had been the catalyst for a journey that transformed not just my professional status, but my fundamental understanding of my own worth. Tomorrow, I would begin serious consideration of expanding Elevate to Chicago, potentially creating a multi-city business with national impact. I would lead my team with the confidence earned through challenge and achievement. I would make decisions based on my values and vision rather than others' expectations. And perhaps most importantly, I would continue paying forward the support that had been so crucial to my own journey, mentoring emerging female entrepreneurs, investing in women-led startups, creating opportunities for voices too often marginalized in the business world. The simple housewife had not only reclaimed her power, but had discovered her purpose, using success as a platform to help others find their own path to authenticity and achievement. It was a purpose Robert could never have imagined for me, nor, in truth, could I have imagined it for myself during those years of gradually diminishing personhood within our marriage. As I reached my apartment building, a beautiful brownstone I had purchased the previous year, another tangible symbol of my independence, I felt profound gratitude for the difficult journey that had led to this present. The painful dissolution of my marriage, the struggle to launch Elevate, the moments of doubt and fear, all had been necessary steps on the path to becoming fully myself. The lobby doorman greeted me with warm respect. "Good evening, Ms. Mitchell. Any packages or messages today?" "No, thank you, Michael," I replied with a genuine smile, appreciating the simple human connection unburdened by complicated history. In my apartment, I kicked off my heels and poured a small glass of wine, settling onto my balcony where the city spread before me in a tapestry of lights. each one representing stories as complex and transformative as my own. Somewhere out there, Robert was beginning his own reinvention, facing the challenges I had confronted 5 years earlier. I found myself hoping he would find his way to authentic self-worth, to purpose beyond status, to relationships based on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. Not because he deserved particular consideration after how he had treated me, but because everyone deserves the opportunity for growth and redemption, including the man who had once called me a simple housewife and now found himself starting over from zero. The symmetry of our reversed situations wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about the universal truth that how we treat others eventually shapes our own destiny. Robert's inability to see women as equals, to value contributions beyond traditional metrics of success, to adapt to changing social dynamics. These limitations had contributed directly to his downfall. My willingness to start over, to learn new skills, to collaborate rather than dominate, to lead with empathy as well as strategy. These choices had built the foundation for unexpected success. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, potential expansion, growing competition, the constant evolution required to stay relevant in a rapidly changing industry. But tonight, sitting quietly with the city lights below and the vast sky above, I was simply grateful for the journey. Every painful step, every hard-won victory, every moment of clarity that had transformed the simple housewife into the woman I had always had the potential to become. The Chicago winter greeted me with its legendary ferocity as I stepped out of O'Hare International Airport. 6 months had passed since Victoria Westfield had first presented the expansion opportunity, and after extensive research and planning, Elevate Marketing was officially establishing its Midwest headquarters. The transition had been both exhilarating and exhausting. I'd been traveling between New York and Chicago bi-weekly, interviewing potential team members, scouting office locations, and meeting with prospective clients, all while ensuring our New York operations continued to thrive under Zoe's capable leadership during my frequent absences. "Ms. Mitchell, your car is ready," announced the driver, who had been arranged to take me to the riverfront property we were considering for our new location. As we navigated through Chicago's downtown, I reflected on how dramatically my life had transformed in the 5 years since leaving Robert. The woman who had once organized dinner parties to advance her husband's career now led bi-coastal strategy, meetings for her own thriving company. The simple housewife now made investment decisions involving millions of dollars. The Chicago property exceeded my expectations. Located in a recently revitalized area along the river, the building offered stunning architectural details with modern infrastructure. The top 2 floors would provide ample space for Elevate's planned Midwest team, with room for the growth we anticipated over the next 5 years. The developer is offering favorable terms given your partial ownership of Pinnacle Tower in New York, explained Carmen Diaz, our real estate consultant. They're eager to have an innovative, woman-led business anchor this development. I walked through the empty space, envisioning how it would transform under our design team's direction. Open collaborative areas near the windows to capitalize on the river views, glass-walled meeting rooms for client presentations, a media production studio for our expanding digital content services. "It's perfect," I told Carmen. "Let's move forward with the negotiations." Later that evening, I met with Hannah Brooks, the woman I had recruited to head our Chicago office. At 42, Hannah had an impressive marketing background with major Midwest brands but had hit the infamous glass ceiling at her previous firm. Her creativity, strategic thinking, and authentic leadership style made her the ideal person to establish Elevate's presence in this new market. "I've lined up meetings with 3 potential anchor clients for next week," Hannah said as we reviewed our launch strategy over dinner. "They're particularly interested in our track record with women-led businesses." "Excellent," I replied. "I've also been thinking about positioning for the Midwest market. We need to maintain our core mission while acknowledging regional differences." Our conversation flowed easily from business strategy to personal backgrounds. Hannah had followed a path not dissimilar to my own: early career success, marriage, to a man who gradually undermined her ambitions, divorce, and professional reinvention. Though her story lacked the dramatic reversal of fortune that characterized my relationship with Robert, the emotional journey of reclaiming her power resonated deeply. When my ex-husband told me I was too ambitious and it was making him uncomfortable, I actually apologized, Hannah confessed with a rueful smile. I spent 3 years deliberately dimming my light to make him feel more secure. What a waste of precious time. We all have our versions of that story, I acknowledged. The question is what we do with those experiences. They can either define us as victims or fuel our determination to create something better, not just for ourselves, but for other women facing similar challenges. By the time we parted ways that evening, I felt confident that Hannah would not only establish Elevate successfully in Chicago, but would infuse it with her own authentic vision while maintaining our core values. Back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop to review the day's emails, finding one from Sandra with the subject, "Line, you won't believe who I saw today." I clicked it open to find a brief message. "Had my first official Westcott board meeting. Guess who's been brought in as a strategic consultant to help with their portfolio restructuring? Our mutual friend." He looked absolutely shell-shocked to see me at the head of the table. Details when you're back in NY. Karma continues to be fascinating. Robert, working as a consultant for his former firm, where Sandra now sat on the board. The news produced an unexpected reaction, neither satisfaction nor concern, but a kind of bemused acknowledgement of life's continuing ironies. Robert, who had once dismissed both of us in different ways, was now essentially working under Sandra's partial oversight. I closed the email without responding, making a mental note to catch up with Sandra when I returned to New York. Whatever Robert's current circumstances, they no longer warranted immediate attention or emotional energy. My focus needed to remain on Elevate's expansion, the future rather than the past. The following morning, I met with the architects who would be redesigning the Chicago space. As we discussed concepts for the new office, my mind kept returning to how differently I approached leadership compared to what I had witnessed during my marriage to Robert. At Westcott, Robert had occupied a corner office deliberately separated from his team, summoning employees when he needed them rather than engaging in their daily work. Status and hierarchy had defined every interaction. Success was measured purely in financial terms, with little regard for the human cost of achieving it. Elevate operated on entirely different principles. Our office designs physically embodied our collaborative approach, with leadership workspaces integrated among team areas. We measured success not just by revenue, but by client outcomes, employee satisfaction, and positive market impact. Most importantly, we recognized that professional achievement and personal well-being were complementary rather than competing priorities. "I'd like to incorporate more natural elements in this space," I told the lead architect, pointing to several areas on the floor plan. Living walls, water features, materials that bring warmth and life to the environment. People do their best work when they feel nurtured rather than processed. He nodded, making notes. That aligns perfectly with the building's sustainability focus. We can design something truly special here. By midday, we had established the preliminary design direction, and I moved on to my next appointment, lunch with Elise Morgan, a potential client whose women's health technology startup had recently secured significant funding. We met at a renowned Chicago restaurant overlooking Millennium Park, its minimalist elegance providing a perfect backdrop for business conversation. Elise arrived precisely on time, a tall woman in her late 30s with natural gray streaks in her dark hair that she had chosen not to conceal. A small but telling detail that suggested authenticity over convention. "It's a pleasure to finally meet in person," she said as we settled at our table. "Your reputation precedes you." All good things, I hope, I replied with a smile. Extraordinary things, actually. You've created quite a narrative. The woman who went from being called a simple housewife to building a multi-million-dollar agency that's changing how female entrepreneurs are represented in the marketplace. I blinked in surprise. You know that story? Elise nodded. You were profiled in Business Innovation Monthly last year. The article mentioned your ex-husband's dismissive comment and how it became a catalyst for your reinvention. It was actually one of the reasons I was interested in working with Elevate. Anyone who can transform an insult into inspiration understands resilience, and that's what I need in a marketing partner. The realization that my personal history had become part of Elevate's public narrative was momentarily disconcerting. I had shared aspects of my journey in occasional interviews, believing transparency about overcoming obstacles could inspire other women facing similar challenges. But I had never intended for my experience with Robert to become a defining element of my professional brand. My personal journey informed our mission but doesn't define it, I clarified. Elevate's success comes from our understanding that women-led businesses often approach problems differently and need marketing strategies that authentically communicate their unique value propositions. Absolutely, Elise agreed. That's exactly why I reached out. My company has developed a revolutionary approach to women's preventative health care that traditional medical marketing simply doesn't know how to position. We're not selling procedures or treatments. We're offering an entirely new paradigm for how women understand and engage with their health. As she outlined her business model, I found myself increasingly intrigued. Elise's company had developed an integrated technology platform that combined advanced diagnostics with personalized wellness planning, specifically addressing healthcare, issues that disproportionately affected women but received minimal research funding or media attention. The medical establishment still treats women's health as a niche market rather than half the population, she explained with barely concealed frustration. We're changing that narrative, but we need help communicating our vision to investors, healthcare providers, and most importantly, to women themselves. By the end of our lunch, I was not only convinced that Elise's company would be an ideal client for Elevate Chicago, but that this partnership represented exactly why expanding beyond New York was strategically important. Regional healthcare. Ecosystems had distinct characteristics, and having local expertise would allow us to craft more effective campaigns for clients like Elise. I'd like Hannah Brooks to join our next conversation, I suggested as we prepared to leave. As head of our Chicago office, she'll be your primary contact if we move forward together. I look forward to meeting her, Elise replied. And Jennifer, thank you for creating a company that understands what women like me are trying to build. It makes all the difference. Her sincere appreciation reminded me again of why I had founded Elevate. Beyond business success or personal vindication, the company represented a necessary correction in a marketplace that consistently undervalued and misunderstood women's contributions and needs. Each client like Elise validated that mission and expanded its impact. The remainder of my Chicago trip unfolded with similar productive energy. We finalized the office lease, Hannah secured 2 anchor clients, and we identified several promising local talents to join the initial team. The foundation was firmly established for Elevate's Midwest expansion, with an anticipated opening in 3 months after renovations were completed. On my final evening in Chicago, I found myself with a rare moment of unscheduled time. Rather than returning to the hotel to catch up on emails, I decided to explore the riverfront near our new location. The early spring air carried a lingering chill, but the setting sun cast a golden glow across the water that invited contemplation. As I walked along the Riverwalk, my phone rang with an unfamiliar Chicago number. Normally, I would let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer. Jennifer Mitchell speaking. Ms. Mitchell, this is Gregory Townsend from Allied Investment Group. The voice was professional, authoritative. I apologize for contacting you directly, but I've been trying to reach you through conventional Channels without success. I didn't recognize the name of either the individual or the firm. How can I help you, Mr. Townsend? I understand you're expanding Elevate marketing to Chicago. Our investment group specializes in scaling successful business concepts nationally. We've been following your company's growth trajectory and would be interested in discussing acquisition possibilities. I stopped walking, surprised by the unexpected approach. Acquisition isn't currently part of our strategic direction, Mr. Townsend. Perhaps not, but I believe our resources could accelerate your expansion plans significantly. We're prepared to make a very competitive offer, in the neighborhood of $60 million, with performance incentives that could increase the total package substantially. The figure momentarily took my breath away. When I had started, Elevate with my inheritance money and a small office in Brooklyn, I could never have imagined it would one day be valued at such a substantial amount. The sum would create generational wealth, secure my financial future permanently, and provide significant rewards for key team members like Zoe who had taken early risks on Elevate's potential. And yet, I appreciate your interest, Mr. Townsend, but Elevate isn't for sale. Our independence is central to our mission and market position. I understand your attachment to what you've built, he countered smoothly. But consider that with Allied's resources and connections, Elevate's impact could grow exponentially. Your vision could reach national scale much more quickly. And of course, you would remain involved as a strategic advisor during the transition period. The last sentence revealed everything about his perspective. During the transition period meant temporary involvement. My eventual exit was assumed. My vision would become someone else's asset to manage, modify, or potentially abandon if it didn't generate the expected return on investment. My decision isn't about attachment, Mr. Townsend. It's about purpose. Elevate exists to support women-led businesses and change how they're represented in the marketplace. That mission requires our independence and our particular company culture. But thank you for your interest. He attempted several more persuasive arguments before accepting that my position was firm. After ending the call, I continued my walk along the river, reflecting on the conversation. 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago, I might have been tempted by such an offer. The validation of Elevate's value, the financial security, the proof of success it represented would have been powerfully appealing. Now, however, I understood that Elevate's true worth couldn't be measured in acquisition dollars. We were building something that extended beyond traditional metrics of business success. Each woman-led company we helped succeed, each female entrepreneur who received funding because of our effective campaign, each innovative product addressing women's needs that gained market traction through our strategies, these impacts created ripples that expanded far beyond our immediate client relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. Great news! Elise Morgan just signed our proposal. Said meeting you confirmed Elevate was the right partner for her company's growth. I smiled, feeling a warm satisfaction that no acquisition offer could match. This was success measured in meaningful impact, helping another woman-led company break through barriers and potentially improve healthcare outcomes for countless women. As I turned to head back to my hotel, I noticed a familiar figure walking toward me on the Riverwalk. William, Robert's former managing partner and now an occasional business ally through his boutique investment firm. He was deep in conversation with another man, neither having noticed me yet. I considered briefly turning in another direction to avoid an awkward encounter, but decided against it. My relationship with William had evolved into a respectful professional connection, despite its complicated origins through Robert. When he looked up and saw me, surprise registered on his face, followed by a genuine smile. "Jennifer, what brings you to Chicago?" he asked as we came face to face. "Elevate is opening a Midwest office," I explained, shaking his hand. "I'm finalizing the details this week." "Congratulations, that's significant expansion." He turned to introduce his companion. This is Martin Reeves, my new partner. Martin, Jennifer Mitchell of Elevate Marketing. Recognition flashed in Martin's eyes as we exchanged greetings. Elevate, the agency specializing in women-led businesses? Your work for Artemis Tech was brilliant. Thank you, I acknowledged. They're an extraordinary client with a visionary founder. William's expression turned thoughtful. You know, we've recently added several female-founded companies to our investment portfolio. They could benefit from your specialized approach. Perhaps we should discuss potential collaboration while you're in town. I'd welcome that conversation, I replied, genuinely interested. William's investment focus on socially conscious businesses aligned well with Elevate's client philosophy. We agreed to meet for breakfast the following morning before my flight back to New York, exchanged contact information, and prepared to continue our separate ways. As we were about to part, William hesitated. I ran into Robert recently, he said, his tone careful. He mentioned seeing you in New York, said it was a constructive conversation. I nodded, appreciating his tactful approach to a potentially sensitive topic. It was unexpected but necessary. Some final closure for both of us, I think. William studied my face, perhaps looking for signs of lingering hurt or resentment. Finding none, he seemed relieved. He's changed since you knew him. The past few years have been a difficult education. Growth usually is, I acknowledged, neither seeking nor requiring details about Robert's current circumstances. I wish him well on his journey. As I continued back to my hotel after parting from William, I realized how genuinely I meant those words. The anger, hurt, and resentment that had once colored my feelings toward Robert had fully dissolved, replaced by a detached compassion that wished him healing without feeling responsible for providing it. The simple housewife comment that had once cut so deeply had been transformed into a historical footnote rather than an active wound. In the most literal sense, I had outgrown the pain of that dismissal by building a life that thoroughly disproved its underlying assumption about my capabilities and worth. The following morning, my breakfast meeting with William proved productively focused on business opportunities rather than shared history. His investment firm had indeed developed a specialty in funding women-led companies addressing significant social challenges, creating natural synergy with Elevate's expertise. We provide the capital, but many of these founders need exactly what you offer: marketing strategies that authentically communicate their vision without sacrificing their values, William explained. The traditional agencies simply don't understand how to position these businesses effectively. By the time our meeting concluded, we had outlined a potential partnership that would create a streamlined pathway for his portfolio companies to access Elevate's services, with favorable terms on both sides. Hannah would follow up to formalize the arrangement, potentially securing several new clients for our Chicago office before it even opened. On the flight back to New York that afternoon, I reviewed the outcomes of the week. Office secured, local leadership established, initial clients signed, potential partnership with Williams' investment firm developed. Elevate Chicago had moved from concept to imminent reality with remarkable speed and clarity of purpose. As the plane began its descent into New York, the skyline emerging through scattered clouds, I felt a surge of appreciation for this city that had witnessed both my lowest moments and my greatest achievements. From the devastated woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal to the confident CEO expanding her company to a second major market, New York had provided the backdrop for a transformation more profound than I could have imagined when I first arrived as Robert's new wife 15 years earlier. Zoe was waiting when I emerged from the security area, a friendly face in the crowd of meeters and greeters. Her presence, a courtesy beyond her role as COO, represented the kind of thoughtful personal connection that defined Elevate's culture. "Welcome back, boss," she greeted me with a warm hug. "How was the Windy City?" "Productive beyond expectations," I replied as we headed toward the exit. "Hannah is everything we hoped for. The space is perfect, and we already have 3 anchor clients signed. Not surprised, Zoe said with a knowing smile. You're quite persuasive when you believe in something. Oh, and you've been invited to deliver the commencement address at Parsons School of Design this spring. Apparently, you're their definition of alumni success. The invitation was unexpected but deeply meaningful. My design education had been one element of my background that Robert had consistently minimized, seeing it as ornamental rather than fundamental to business acumen. Now that same education was being recognized as part of the foundation for Elevate's distinctive approach to visual marketing and brand development. I'd be honored, I told Zoe, already contemplating what wisdom I might share with young professionals beginning their careers. What would I have wanted someone to tell me when I was graduating, before I met Robert, before I gradually surrendered my professional identity, before I had to rebuild from scratch? As we drove from the airport toward Manhattan, Zoe updated me on developments at the New York office, a major campaign launch for a longtime client, progress on 2 new account pitches, and a promising partnership opportunity with a women's business accelerator program. And Sandra called, she added as we neared the city. Said to tell you the universe's sense of humor remains intact and that she'd explain over lunch tomorrow. I smiled, suspecting her cryptic message related to whatever had transpired at Westcott with Robert. While I remained disinterested in the details of his current situation, Sandra's evident amusement suggested another turn in the complex karmic wheel that seemed to connect our various life paths. Back in my apartment that evening, I found myself drawn to the small home office where Elevate had first existed as nothing more than a business plan and determined vision. The space had been preserved largely as it was during those early days. The simple desk where I had worked late into the night developing marketing concepts, the whiteboard still bearing faded notes from initial brainstorming sessions, the wall of inspiration that had grown from a few magazine clippings to a vibrant collage of success milestones. Sitting at that desk, I opened my laptop and began drafting thoughts for the commencement address. What could I tell these young graduates that would truly serve them in navigating the complex territory ahead? Be wary of surrendering your identity, even gradually, even for love. Recognize that true partnership enhances rather than diminishes individual potential. Understand that professional worth isn't determined by others' recognition. Never allow someone else's limitation of vision to become your limitation of achievement. Remember that sometimes the most painful endings create space for the most authentic beginnings. These hard-earned insights had emerged from the collapse of my marriage and subsequent rebuilding of my life. They weren't abstract principles, but lived experiences that had shaped my approach to both business and personal relationships. The wisdom I had to offer wasn't about specific career strategies or networking techniques. Plenty of successful executives could provide that kind of guidance. My unique contribution lay in understanding how easily talented women could be diverted from their authentic paths by relationships that subtly diminished rather than supported their ambitions. As I developed these thoughts into an outline for the address, my phone rang, Hannah calling from Chicago. "Sorry to disturb you after your travel day," she began, "but I wanted to share some interesting news. That investment group that approached you, Allied, they contacted me directly this afternoon with the same acquisition proposal." I frowned, concerned by the attempted end run around my clear refusal. "What did you tell them?" "That Elevate isn't for sale at any price, and that approaching me separately after you declined was both unprofessional and ineffective." Her tone conveyed both amusement and indignation. But here's the interesting part. When I asked more questions about their interest in Elevate specifically, it became clear they're assembling female-focused companies for some kind of consolidated women's market holding company. They've already acquired 2 similar businesses. The revelation confirmed my instinctive rejection of their offer. So, we'd become just one segment of their female market strategy, probably stripped of the very qualities that make Elevate effective. Exactly. Hannah agreed. It's the corporate equivalent of pinking products, slapping a female-friendly veneer on conventional business approaches without understanding the substantive differences that make women-focused companies successful. After concluding our call, I felt renewed certainty in my decision to maintain Elevate's independence. What we had built wasn't simply a successful marketing agency, but a new model for how businesses could operate, integrating traditionally feminine values like collaboration, empathy, and holistic thinking with rigorous strategy and execution. Reducing that innovative approach to merely another acquisition in a corporate portfolio would have undermined its essential character and impact. The simple housewife who had reinvented herself as a CEO understood something that traditional business models often missed. That authentic purpose created more sustainable value than rapid scale divorced from founding principles. Tomorrow would bring lunch with Sandra and her intriguing update about Robert, continued planning for the Chicago launch, and the beginning of my commencement address draft. Tonight, however, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection on the journey that had brought me here, from dismissed spouse to respected business leader, from financial dependence to property ownership, from defined by marriage to defined by purpose. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but its challenges had forged something precious: a life aligned with genuine values, work that created meaningful impact, and relationships based on mutual respect rather than power imbalance. The odd, simple housewife comment that had once wounded so deeply had become a reminder of how profoundly limiting others' perceptions can be when we allow them to define our capabilities and worth. As I prepared for bed, gazing out at the city lights sparkling against the night sky, I felt profound gratitude for the difficult journey that had led to this present moment. Not because the pain had been necessary or deserved, but because the strength discovered through overcoming it had revealed possibilities I might otherwise never have recognized. The woman Robert had dismissed as just a simple housewife had built something far greater than he could have imagined. Not to prove him wrong, but because she had finally recognized her own value independent of his or anyone else's assessment. That recognition, more than any business success or financial achievement, represented the true measure of how completely I had transformed since that painful moment at his corporate party 5 years ago. 1 year after our Chicago expansion, I stood at the podium in Elevate's New York headquarters, addressing our combined teams gathered for our annual vision meeting. The room buzzed with energy. Nearly 70 employees from both offices, connected by video conference to include those who couldn't travel. The growth had been remarkable, exceeding even our most optimistic projections. As we celebrate Elevate's 6th anniversary, I began, I want to acknowledge not just what we've built, but how we've built it. In an industry often driven by ego and competition, we've created success through collaboration and authenticity. In a market that frequently misunderstands or diminishes women's voices, we've amplified them. In a business environment that often sacrifices values for growth, we've proven that principles and profit can advance together. Looking out at these talented individuals, many of whom had taken chances on Elevate when it was merely a promising concept rather than a proven success, I felt profound gratitude. Zoe, now a partial owner through the equity she'd earned in those early challenging days. Hannah, who had built our Chicago presence from concept to thriving reality. Marcus, whose creative vision had shaped our distinctive visual approach. Dozens of others who contributed their unique talents to our collective mission. Today, we're announcing 2 major initiatives that will carry our mission forward, I continued. First, the Elevate Foundation, a nonprofit organization that will provide pro bono marketing services to women entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds who are building businesses with social impact. Second, the Elevate Accelerator, a 12-week program offering funding, mentorship, and marketing support to early-stage, women-led businesses with innovative approaches to long-standing problems. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. These initiatives represented the evolution of our mission, moving beyond client services to creating infrastructure that would support the next generation of female entrepreneurs. As the meeting transitioned to breakout sessions focused on implementation details, Sandra joined me near the refreshment table. Now a nationally recognized advocate for gender equity in finance, she had become a key advisor for the Elevate Foundation. "Quite a journey from that first coffee meeting 5 years ago," she observed, handing me a sparkling water. "Remember when you were questioning whether you could even launch a small marketing consultancy?" I smiled at the memory of my early self-doubt. I was still carrying Robert's voice in my head, telling me I didn't understand the business world, that I would inevitably fail without his guidance. And now look, bi-coastal agency, foundation, accelerator program. I'd say you proved him definitively wrong. "It stopped being about proving him wrong a long time ago," I replied thoughtfully. "That motivation wouldn't have sustained me through the challenges of building all this. It became about proving something to myself, and eventually about creating something meaningful regardless of personal validation." Sandra nodded, understanding the evolution I was describing. "Speaking of Robert," she said, lowering her voice slightly, "did you hear he's leaving New York? Apparently he's accepted a position with a financial firm in Singapore. Complete fresh start." The news registered as neutral information rather than triggering any emotional response. I hope it works out well for him. Everyone deserves a chance to rebuild. My genuineness seemed to surprise Sandra slightly. "You've truly moved beyond it all, haven't you? The hurt, the anger, the need for vindication. Life's too short and too precious to stay anchored to past injuries," I said simply. "My focus is forward, building Elevate's next chapter, supporting other women's journeys, creating positive impact." After the meeting concluded, I returned to my office to prepare for my final appointment of the day, a mentoring session with Lucia Reyes, a promising young entrepreneur who had contacted me after hearing my commencement address at Parsons 3 months earlier. Her business concept, an innovative platform connecting immigrant women with skills-based employment opportunities, had impressed me with its potential for transformative impact. As I reviewed her business plan before our meeting, I reflected on how coming full circle often reveals itself in unexpected ways. 10 years ago, I had been the corporate wife serving canapés at Robert's business functions. 5 years ago, I had been the devastated woman rebuilding after his dismissive comment shattered my self-image. Today, I was the established CEO mentoring the next generation of female founders. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but each difficult turn had ultimately led to greater alignment with my authentic self and purpose. The painful ending of my marriage had created space for a more meaningful beginning. Robert's dismissal of me as just a simple housewife had catalyzed the reclamation of my power and potential. When Lucia arrived for our meeting, her nervous excitement reminded me of my own early days building Elevate, the combination of vision and vulnerability that characterizes most entrepreneurial beginnings. "I keep revising the financial projections," she admitted, spreading her documents across the conference table. "I'm worried they're not robust enough to attract serious investors." "Let's look at them together," I offered, remembering my own struggles with this aspect of business planning. Financial projections are important, but what investors in this space really connect with is authentic purpose combined with practical execution. Tell me again why this platform matters to you personally. As Lucia shared her story, how her mother, a trained accountant in Mexico, had spent years cleaning houses in America because her credentials weren't recognized, I observed the passion that animated her features. This personal connection to her business concept would ultimately prove more valuable than perfect spreadsheets in attracting the right kind of support. "Your mother's experience gives you insight that a consultant studying immigrant employment could never acquire," I explained. "That lived understanding is part of your competitive advantage. Don't minimize it when speaking with potential investors." Our session continued for over an hour, covering everything from marketing strategy to organizational structure. Throughout our conversation, I found myself sharing lessons from my own journey. Not just the practical business insights, but the deeper wisdom about maintaining authenticity while navigating challenging circumstances. Building a meaningful business isn't just about the product or service, I told her as our meeting concluded. It's about creating environments where people can contribute their best selves, where purpose and profit reinforce rather than compromise each other, where success is measured in impact as well as income. Lucia gathered her materials, her expression reflecting renewed determination. Thank you for taking time to mentor me personally. When I first reached out, I never expected the CEO of Elevate would meet with me one-on-one. 6 years ago, I was sitting exactly where you are now, nervous, uncertain, but deeply committed to a vision that others couldn't yet see. Someone took time to guide me when I needed direction. Passing that support forward isn't just kindness. It's how we change systemic patterns that have historically limited women's entrepreneurial success. After she left, I remained in the conference room momentarily, reflecting on how completely my perspective had evolved since those early painful days after leaving Robert. The woman who had once defined herself through her marriage had discovered a more authentic identity through its ending. The simple housewife had built something complex, meaningful, and increasingly influential. As I gathered my belongings to head home, my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown international number. Congratulations on the foundation and accelerator announcement. Impressive evolution of your vision. Wishing you continued success. R. Robert. Somehow he had heard about today's announcement, perhaps through remaining connections at Westcott or mutual acquaintances. The message was simple, respectful, and notably free from any hint of the condescension that had once characterized his attitude toward my professional endeavors. I considered whether to respond, ultimately deciding on a brief acknowledgement. Thank you. Best wishes for your new beginning in Singapore. The exchange was minimal, yet represented significant growth on both sides. My ability to accept his good wishes without suspicion or resentment, his recognition of my achievements without qualification or diminishment. We had both traveled considerable distance from the people we had been during our marriage. That evening, as I walked home through the vibrant city streets, I felt a sense of peaceful completion. Not because all goals had been achieved or all challenges overcome, but because I had finally integrated the various chapters of my journey into a coherent narrative of growth rather than loss. The simple housewife comment that had once pierced so deeply had been transformed from wound to catalyst, from insult to ironic counterpoint to all that followed. The doorman position that had symbolized Robert's reduced circumstances was giving way to a new opportunity for reinvention, just as my divorce had ultimately opened the path to more authentic self-expression and achievement. I stopped at a small neighborhood bakery to purchase a celebration cake for the weekend gathering I was hosting, a casual dinner for the women who had supported me throughout this journey. Sandra would be there, along with Zoe, Hannah visiting from Chicago, my former therapist, Dr. Levine, and several others who had provided crucial guidance or friendship during different phases of my rebuilding process. Special occasion? Asked the woman behind the counter as she boxed the cake. A celebration? Of journeys, I replied with a smile. Mine and those who traveled alongside me. She nodded as if this made perfect sense, handing me the package with warm wishes for a lovely evening. As I continued homeward, I reflected on the true measure of how far I had come. It wasn't Elevate's impressive revenue figures or client roster, though those external markers of success were certainly gratifying. It wasn't the foundation or accelerator program, though their potential for positive impact filled me with purpose and anticipation. The most meaningful transformation was internal. The shift from a woman who had allowed others to define her worth to someone who recognized and honored her own value. From someone who sought validation through relationships to a person grounded in authentic self-knowledge. From defining success through external recognition to measuring it by alignment with core values and principles, the simple housewife had discovered she was actually a complex, capable, multifaceted human being whose potential had been temporarily constrained by a limiting relationship but never truly diminished by it. The painful process of breaking free from those constraints had revealed strengths I might never have discovered in more comfortable circumstances. As I entered my apartment, the beautiful space I had created that reflected my personal aesthetic rather than anyone else's expectations, I felt profound gratitude for the difficult journey that had led to this present moment, not because the pain had been necessary or deserved, but because the growth it catalyzed had revealed possibilities beyond anything I could have imagined while living within the narrow boundaries of my marriage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Implementing the foundation and accelerator programs, guiding Elevate's continued evolution, mentoring emerging female entrepreneurs like Lucia. The work was ongoing, the mission still unfolding. But tonight, preparing for the gathering that would celebrate how far we had all come, I embraced the simple truth that had emerged from my complicated journey. The woman once dismissed as just a simple housewife had built something remarkable, not to prove others wrong, but because she had finally, fully recognized her own capacity to create meaningful change in the world. And that recognition, more than any external achievement, represented the true measure of success. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.